Scientists expected a dusty old cloak when they ran high-res scans on the Shroud of Turin, but what they found instead was an invisible frame burned into the linen itself in divine radiation. It wasn't painted or drawn. It was encoded like a photographic negative, centuries before photography even existed. Could this frame, buried in thread, be the first-century fingerprint of the Nazarene man himself? And if this isn't fake, as some scientists assume, what does that say about Jesus, about Christianity, about us? Before we chase this clue head-on, let's go back. Because this cloth isn't just fabric. It may be the only image ever left by God in human form. In a dusty cathedral in 14th century France, a figure emerged that didn't make sense. It was a long linen cloth, over 14 feet, carrying the faint image of a human shape. Not just any shape. It looked like whoever was wrapped on that cloak had suffered greatly. But here's what confused everyone, especially the artists and scholars of the time. The image didn't look like art. There were no brushstrokes, pigments, or outlines. It wasn't drawn or painted. It was just there, like a shadow frozen in linen. Curious minds came from all over Europe. Some believed it instantly. Others said it had to be fake. And yet no one could explain how it was made. Centuries passed. The church stayed cautious, never calling it proof, but also never denying its mystery. And then came the scientists. By the late 20th century, the shroud had been hit with every kind of test. Infrared scans, ultraviolet light, electron microscopy. Yet there was nothing to hold on to. The image wasn't embedded in the cloth, it barely touched the surface. Each thread were just microns thick, unstained at the core. But here's what broke the scientists. When they looked at it close up, the image disappeared. Zoomed in, it was just ordinary cloth. Nothing special. But take 5 steps back, and suddenly, a face begins to appear. Then, a full body, clear, haunting, and unforgettable. That doesn't happen with art. It doesn't happen with photography either. It was like the image was suspended within the cloth, but not on it. But if you think that's strange, just wait. Because when they ran it through a 3D analyzer meant for scanning planets, what emerged wasn't a flat image anymore. It was a full human form, with something even stranger hiding in the curves. If no one had ever touched the cloth, what left this imprint? Whose imprint was it? And what happens when the most advanced image processing tech in the world, NASA-grade space equipment, gets involved in a spiritual phenomenon? In 1976, Jackson and Jumper, 2 NASA imaging specialists, weren't looking for any religious revelations. These men worked with satellites. They helped decode images of the Moon and Mars. But someone handed them a photograph of the Shroud of Turin and said, "Try this on your machine." That machine was the VP8 image analyzer. It's designed to turn brightness into height. Basically, if a photo has real spatial data, it'll pop into a 3D shape. Paintings don't do that. Regular photos don't either. They just come out warped or flat. But this wasn't anything regular. When they scanned the shroud, something jaw-dropping happened. The face rose off the screen. A full human form began to emerge. A nose, a mouth, closed eyes, shoulders, ribs, knees slightly bent, all proportionally accurate, with visible depth. It was as if the cloth had recorded the shape of a man. The swelling in the cheeks looked like blunt trauma. The muscles sagged naturally, like someone had hung downward. His hair fell straight back, suggesting he had been laying flat. Even the feet and fingers had real structure. There was dimension under the knees, implying pressure, like the body had been lifted and then vanished. Now, here's the wild part. They tried scanning other images, icons, portraits, even photographs of real people. Nothing came close. All of them glitched, flattened, or warped. But only the shroud encoded 3-dimensional spatial data. How does a piece of linen, with no ink or dye, record topographical information? And more importantly, how does it record emotion? Because what rose from that scan wasn't just a face. It was suffering, dignity, peace. A man who had endured unspeakable pain. But that's not even the part that keeps researchers awake at night. Because once they started analyzing the blood, real human blood, they discovered something that rewrote everything we thought we knew about death, burial, and resurrection. Except the strangest part wasn't the blood's type. It was where it came from, and how it got on the cloth without ever soaking through. When researchers first tested the reddish stains on the shroud, they were expecting something boring, maybe rust, or old paint, or iron oxide from medieval pigments. Just another trick of the past. But it wasn't paint, it was blood. A type AB human blood. A rarer group, but not unusual among Jewish men from the Middle East. Still, that wasn't the shocking part. Under the microscope, the blood revealed signs of suffering, real suffering. Elevated bilirubin levels, which only spike during extreme physical trauma, plasma separation, hemoglobin breakdown. In other words, this wasn't just blood, it was the blood of someone who had been tortured. Everything matched what would happen during a Roman crucifixion: the internal stress, the dehydration, the trauma, and all of it was embedded in a cloth that first appeared in the 1300s, long before anyone could have known what those markers even meant. So, how on earth did a medieval hoaxer fake blood chemistry that was discovered hundreds of years later? And not just that. The blood appears in all the exact places you'd expect if someone had been crucified. Trickles from the scalp as if from thorns. Deep wrist wounds, not palms, which matches modern understanding of how crucifixion nails were actually driven. Pierced feet, a deep chest wound, scourge marks across the back in a distinctive double pattern, exactly like those left by a Roman whip called a flagrum. You're not just looking at blotches, you're looking at a full map of human agony. It reads like a forensic crime scene, a voiceless testimony of someone who didn't just die, but was executed. And the more modern science pokes at it, the harder it gets to explain away, because this isn't how a painting behaves. But here's the most perplexing question even scientists struggle to answer. Why was the image behaving like an optical illusion? The more people studied it, the more it started to click. The Shroud of Turin isn't like any other archaeological stumble. This looks like a burial cloth. And not just any burial cloth. The burial cloth of Jesus? If what scientists discovered about the shroud turns out real, what do you think would happen to the basis of Christianity itself? What happens to the faith of Christians all over the world? They've always believed Jesus died and resurrected. But how come his burial cloth is amongst us? In 1898, an Italian photographer took the first ever recorded picture of the shroud, and when he developed the negative, he almost dropped it, because staring back at him, clearer than anything visible to the naked eye, was the full face of the man himself. His features didn't just come into focus, they glowed. That's when they realized the shroud isn't a normal image, it's a photographic negative. But what does that mean, and how is that even possible? Photography wasn't invented until centuries later. So, who in the 1300s would even think to create a light-reversed image? And even stranger, the image isn't soaked into the fabric. It floats on the very surface of each thread, less than a micron deep. Some scientists believe the image was created by a short, intense burst of radiant energy, like ultraviolet light. But nothing from that era could have done it, which brings us to the haunting possibility. What if the cloth didn't just capture a body, but the moment that body disappeared? Some researchers now believe the image on the shroud wasn't painted, scorched, or stained. It was seared into the fibers by a sudden burst of radiant energy. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. One theory suggests ultraviolet light, so intense and brief it left behind a photographic negative. In 2011, scientists from Italy's National Agency for New Technologies tried to reproduce the image using high-powered lasers. Their conclusion? It would have taken a UV light output of at least 100 billion watts, a power level no machine on Earth can produce. Not today, not in the Middle Ages, not even in theory without vaporizing the cloth. So now the question becomes, what kind of force, what kind of event could emit that much energy from inside a burial shroud? Some speculate it was like a nuclear flashpoint, an explosion of energy at the molecular level. Others see something more supernatural, a divine moment captured in linen, a resurrection not just seen, but imprinted. And there's another layer to the mystery. The image isn't just on the surface, it penetrates only the outermost fibers of the cloth, less than 1/5 of a human hair deep. It's as if the image just appeared. But for all this incredible data, for all the physical clues and scientific wonder, there's still one thorn in the side of the shroud's authenticity. The thing skeptics always bring up, a single test result that seems to contradict everything else. The carbon dating scandal. Back in 1988, scientists ran a carbon dating test on a sliver of the shroud. The results came back quickly and definitively. It's a medieval cloth that existed between the 13th to 14th century. End of mystery, or so they thought. But not long after, textile experts raised a red flag. The tested sample came from a corner of the cloth that had been damaged in a fire and later rewoven. In other words, they didn't test the original shroud. They tested a repair job. Further analysis showed chemical differences between that patch and the rest of the linen. The weave patterns didn't even match. So now, the question flipped. Was the entire shroud written off based on the wrong thread? And more importantly, why hasn't the Vatican greenlit a full retest using modern imaging and untouched fabric? If this really is history's greatest artifact, why not double check? But let's push past the science for a second. What about the face itself? Here's something most people miss. That same face, with the long bruised nose, swollen cheekbone, deep-set eyes, is not just on the shroud. It's been appearing for centuries. Go back to 6th century Christian icons, especially the ones found in the Eastern Church. The resemblance is eerie, not just similar, it's precise. Down to the asymmetrical swelling under one eye, down to the hair parting, down to the strange calm in the expression. But wait, those icons were painted 800 years before the shroud was discovered. So, how did artists capture injuries they never saw? One theory is that early Christians somehow saw the shroud centuries earlier and passed the image on in paint and stone. Maybe it was kept in secret, maybe it moved through hidden hands. But something was passed down, which raises the deeper question, what if this cloth wasn't a reflection of Christian art, but its source? What if every painting of Jesus that came after was just trying to copy the real thing? But now we reach the deepest tier in the whole mystery, and it's not in the fabric. This isn't just about linen or pigment or pixels. It's about something much heavier. If the shroud is fake, then we're looking at the most mathematically precise, scientifically baffling hoax of all time, created with tools no forger could have had. But if it's real, then we are staring into the moment of suffering that changed the world. Not just an image, but a record of trauma, wounds that line up with scripture, a human face frozen in light. So, here's the final question. If this really is Jesus, what does that mean for you?